Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and keep watching more details. American Pickers Mike Wolfe's home fails inspection. Mike Wolfe has put a lot of his money into trying to renovate the small town of Columbia, Tennessee. However, he has met opposition along the way from people who prefer that the town remain unchanged. The sleepy little town also has residents happy to see an influx of money come in to make improvements. However, Mike just ran into another roadblock in his mission to fix things up in the small town. Mike Wolfe's home fails inspection. Mike Wolfe, 60, has been working on renovating parts of the small town of Columbia, Tennessee. One of the things he has been working on is his own home there. Mike wants to renovate it and return it to how it looked in the past, but he has just run into an obstacle along the way. Mike failed a recent inspection of his home. The problem comes from an electrical issue. Mike had a building permit to repair the tower and front porch of the home. On July 8, inspectors came over but failed the house for framing and building. The reasoning was that the new electrical wiring had been installed possibly outside of the proper procedure via the U.S. Sun. Mike also needed at least one more rafter tie near the northwest corner. There was good news though. The inspectors showed back up on July 10 and passed the house with Mike's changes. Now Mike continues his $1 million renovation on his home. What is Mike Wolfe doing to his home? Mike Wolfe is working on turning his home into what it used to look like back in the day. He shared an Instagram post about his work and offered up a photo of the house when it was built. The 1873 Italianate I've been working on for a few years in Columbia TN is coming together, Mike wrote in the caption. He then said the house was missing the tower and the porch, and he has not brought it back to its formal glory. He then wrote, "Places like this to me belong to the community. People come and go. We're all just caretakers. In the end, the properties endure if we prioritize their significance to each town's story." Mike has been working on other things around the town that is more about building up business and trying to help lift the community. However, when it comes to his house, it is all about bringing back the past. On a crisp morning in Tennessee, the gleaming sun cast an amber glow over Mike Wolfe's idyllic property. Known to millions as the face of American Pickers, Mike had spent years honing his craft of salvaging America's forgotten relics, finding value in the discarded, and turning junk into cherished treasures. But today, as he gazed at his sprawling farmhouse, a meticulously restored 1930s gem nestled in Leaper's Fork, he faced an unexpected issue. A visit from the county inspector. The problem had started innocuously enough. Mike had recently expanded his property, adding a barn to house some of his more delicate finds, antique motorcycles, vintage signage, and an old jukebox collection. The barn itself was a work of art, designed with reclaimed wood and outfitted with artifacts from his years on the road. Yet this latest addition had brought the county's attention, and a formal inspection was now in order. Mike's farmhouse, a place that many fans imagined was as impeccable as the treasures he rescued, was anything but typical. In place of modern finishes, there were relics of yesteryears, metal lanterns, early 20th century cabinetry, rustic wooden beams from a deconstructed schoolhouse, and glass doorknobs that hadn't been made in half a century. As much as he wanted to preserve the character of his home, there were whispers that it might not meet some of the county's current codes. The inspector arrived promptly at 9 a.m., clipboard in hand, his brows furrowed before he even stepped inside. With a handshake that betrayed his hesitation, the inspector introduced himself as Gary, a no-nonsense man with a penchant for following every line of the codebook. "Nice place you got here," Gary remarked, his eyes shifting from the barn to the aged farmhouse. "But looks can be deceiving." Mike chuckled, hoping to lighten the mood. "I always say the best treasures are hidden under a little bit of rust and dust." Gary's expression barely changed. "That's what I'm here to find out." The inspection began with the barn. Mike knew that the foundation and framing were up to code. He'd overseen every aspect of its construction. Gary, however, noticed an issue with the wiring almost immediately. Apparently, the salvaged fixtures, while aesthetically charming, didn't align with modern safety standards. "These vintage Edison bulbs you got here, they're beautiful," Gary admitted, "but they can't handle the voltage required for modern electrical safety. If they overload, it's a fire risk." Mike bit back his frustration. The light fixtures were carefully chosen to match the vintage aesthetic of the barn, but he knew better than to argue. "All right, Gary, I'll make a note to change the bulbs." With that, they moved into the farmhouse. Mike had always believed that the home's character was its charm. Antique wallpaper, creaky wooden floors, and clawfoot tubs, but Gary wasn't impressed. He tapped on the walls, testing for signs of decay. "See these wood beams?" he asked. "They look beautiful, sure, but if they're not treated regularly, they could lead to structural issues." "I inspect them myself every few months," Mike replied, almost defensively. "I'd never let them get to the point of rot." Gary nodded but jotted down a note anyway. "It's not just about checking, Mike. These beams need modern treatments to prevent termite infestations. A house this old, termites would have a feast." As they walked through the narrow hallways, Gary stopped in front of an antique staircase with an ornate wrought iron railing Mike had salvaged from an abandoned mansion. "Nice rail, but it's too short," Gary noted. "If you have guests, there's a risk of a fall." Mike sighed, already mentally listing the repairs. He hadn't anticipated how much of his beloved home would fall short by modern standards. Every dent, every chipped corner held a story, a fragment of the past he cherished. In the kitchen, Gary's expression grew grim. The rustic wooden countertops, beautifully varnished with wear from decades of meals and gatherings, didn't meet current food safety codes. "I get it, you're all about the vintage feel. But these counters, they're porous. Bacteria can build up in the tiniest cracks. You'd be better off switching to something easier to disinfect." "I'm not exactly running a restaurant out of here," Mike protested gently. "It's just me and my family." Gary remained unmoved. "Code is code, Mike." They entered the basement, where Mike had a collection of old tools and even some early medical equipment he picked up over the years. Gary eyed the space with unease, noting the lack of proper ventilation. "This basement doesn't meet the code for habitable spaces," he said, shaking his head. "If you're storing stuff down here, that's one thing, but it shouldn't be used as a workspace unless you can improve the air circulation. Plus, some of these tools and machinery are hazards. You'd need a permit to house them legally." For the first time, Mike felt a flicker of irritation. American pickers had taken him to every forgotten nook of the country, and he'd seen houses left untouched for decades, filled with as much character and quirks as his own. "I'm preserving history here," he said, with a hint of exasperation, "not trying to make everything new and shiny." Gary let out a sigh, but he softened a little. "I understand, Mike. It's a beautiful home, it really is, but safety and history don't always go hand in hand." After 2 hours, the inspection was complete. Gary's list of violations was long, from electrical updates needed in the barn to railings, treated beams, and ventilation upgrades throughout the farmhouse. Mike felt like he was staring at a list of ways his beloved home was failing to live up to today's standards. "All right, so what now?" Mike asked, scratching his head. "You've got options," Gary replied. "You can make these changes gradually. Some of these are non-negotiable for safety. Others are recommendations. But if you don't bring things up to code eventually, you could face fines down the road." After Gary left, Mike leaned against the barn's old wooden door, feeling a strange blend of frustration and resolve. He understood the need for safety, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been lost in translation between preserving history and meeting modern expectations. As he stood there, Mike's mind drifted to the many people he'd met on his journeys, those who cherished their old items, quirks and imperfections and all. He realized that, just like every rusted sign and weathered bumper, his home was a testament to resilience, a link to the past that didn't fit neatly into a rulebook. In the weeks that followed, Mike tackled the updates thoughtfully, making only the changes he deemed essential. He swapped out the bulbs in the barn and treated the wood beams to keep termites at bay. But the countertops, the rustic stair rail, those were staying, come what may. The day the inspector returned for a follow-up, he was surprised to find the place largely unchanged. "Decided not to change everything?" Gary asked with a raised brow. Mike grinned. "Turns out, Gary, history doesn't need to be perfect, just safe enough."